The medieval justice system had a rather peculiar menu of options. These 10 methods of persuasion ranged from the absurdly simple to the bizarrely complex, proving that history's most creative ideas weren't always its kindest ones. While modern courts might throw the book at you, medieval courts preferred to throw you on the rack, arguably history's least popular fitness equipment. The dungeons of Europe housed an impressive array of devices designed to extract confessions from the unwilling, but the rack stood out as the medieval equivalent of a really, really bad chiropractor appointment. The rack was essentially a wooden frame that looked deceptively simple at first glance, much like those easy-to-assemble furniture pieces, except this one came pre-assembled with a healthy dose of torment. At its core lay a large rectangular frame equipped with rollers at both ends, connected by heavy-duty ropes. A crank mechanism attached to these rollers would slowly turn, pulling the victim's limbs in opposite directions. The torturers called it an examination table, which really should have resulted in history's first false advertising lawsuit. The device earned its reputation through its methodical approach to inflicting pain. Unlike the quick terror of the gallows or the swift strike of the executioner's axe, the rack was all about taking its time. Medieval torture's answer to slow cooking. Except the only thing getting tenderized was the prisoner. The victim would be securely fastened to the frame, their wrists and ankles bound by strong ropes or iron shackles. Then began what the torturers euphemistically called the questioning, medieval Europe's longest-running Q&A session where every wrong answer resulted in an extra inch of height. The process started slowly, with the crank turning just enough to create uncomfortable tension in the victim's joints. As the interrogation continued, the tension would gradually increase. The human body is remarkably flexible, but the rack pushed well beyond those natural limits, like a yoga class gone horribly wrong. First came the popping of shoulders, a sound that echoed through stone chambers. If the victim still wouldn't confess, the cranking would continue, moving on to elbows, knees, and finally, the hips. A full-body workout that would make modern CrossFit enthusiasts wince. Here's a fascinating, if somewhat disturbing fact. Victims subjected to the rack could gain up to 6 inches in height during their session. This made it medieval Europe's first height enhancement program. Though strangely enough, it never caught on with the nobility. Perhaps it was the side effects: dislocated joints, torn ligaments, and internal organ damage, the kind of things they still don't put in medicine warning labels. Those who survived rarely walked again, making it the world's first permanent disability program with 100% acceptance rate. The rack wasn't just about physical torture, it was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The slow, methodical nature of the process gave victims plenty of time to contemplate their fate, making it the medieval version of waiting at the DMV, except significantly more painful. The creaking of the wooden frame, the clicking of the crank mechanism, a symphony of suffering that made the local town crier sound like a gospel choir. The device became so notorious that its mere presence in a torture chamber was often enough to elicit confessions. The Tower of London's rack became particularly feared, earning itself the kind of one-star reviews. Some prisoners confessed to anything they were accused of just upon seeing the device, medieval history's first example of look, no touch persuasion techniques. Each region of Europe developed its own variations of the rack, in what might be called the worst international trade show ever. The Spanish added extra ropes because apparently regular stretching wasn't uncomfortable enough. The French developed a more precise cranking mechanism, bringing their reputation for refined cuisine to the world of torture. German engineers, never ones to be outdone in matters of efficiency, added reinforced rollers. Because if you're going to break someone, you might as well do it with superior engineering. The device's efficiency at extracting confessions made it a favorite among medieval authorities who firmly believed that pain would reveal truth, an early version of no pain, no gain that seriously missed the point. There are documentations filled with confessions obtained on the rack, though modern historians note that many of these confessions were likely false. Turns out people will confess to almost anything to avoid becoming human taffy, including claiming they were a dragon in a past life. Speaking of pain and truth, while the rack was brutal in its application, it was just one instrument in medieval Europe's vast arsenal of judicial persuasion. If the rack was medieval Europe's answer to stretching exercises, the scavenger's daughter was its solution to overcrowding. Created during the reign of Henry VIII by Lieutenant Leonard Skeffington, who probably wouldn't have wanted this to be his legacy, This device took the opposite approach to persuasion. Instead of pulling victims apart, it practiced the art of extreme compression. The name itself is a bit misleading. Despite sounding like a rejected title for a Jane Austen novel, The Scavenger's Daughter was actually named after its inventor, whose title was Skeffington the Scavenger. Medieval nickname game wasn't particularly creative, but at least it was direct. The device itself, however, showed plenty of creativity in its approach to human misery. Structurally, it resembled a metal hug gone horribly wrong. The device consisted of an A-frame-shaped metal construct with tight bands that would force the victim into a crouching position. The prisoner's head would be pushed toward their knees while their arms were wrapped around their legs. If you're trying this position right now, don't. Your health insurance probably doesn't cover medieval torture reenactments. The real horror began when the torturer started tightening the screws. As the metal bands constricted, the victim was slowly compressed into an ever tighter ball. The process would continue until the blood began to pour from the victim's nose, ears, and fingertips. A gruesome side effect that medieval medical practitioners probably didn't include in their wellness brochures. One particularly nasty aspect of The Scavenger's Daughter was its efficiency at causing maximum discomfort in minimum space. While the rack required an entire room and several operators, this device could create unbearable agony in a space no bigger than a modern office chair. It was, in a terribly literal sense, medieval torture's answer to downsizing. The Tower of London, ever the trendsetter in medieval torture fashion, kept their Scavenger's Daughter in regular use. In 1580, it mentioned a prisoner named Thomas Cottam who got an unwanted demonstration of the device. The notes describe how he was bent and crushed together, such that for 2 weeks after he was unable to walk upright and his arms and legs were crippled. Being compressed into a ball triggered intense claustrophobia, making every breath a struggle. Prisoners would feel their own heartbeat hammering against their knees, creating a countdown rhythm to their next confession. Some survivors reported that the sensation of being crushed stayed with them long after their release. Medieval Europe's first documented cases of compression-related PTSD. Henry VIII, not content with just revolutionizing English marriage customs, took particular pride in this addition to his torture arsenal. The device gained such notoriety that it became known as one of the three sisters of torture in the Tower of London, alongside the rack and a third device that we'll get to later. These three earned their family nickname through their particular effectiveness at extracting confessions, though they probably wouldn't have made it into any family portrait. The Scavenger's Daughter proved especially popular during the religious upheavals of the 16th century. Catholic priests caught practicing their faith would often find themselves getting better acquainted with the device than they'd prefer. There's a priest who wrote that the experience was like being folded into a pocket prayer book, though I doubt that's what he had in mind for religious devotion. Perhaps the most ironic aspect of The Scavenger's Daughter was its role as a space-saving alternative to the rack. When dungeon real estate was at a premium, torturers could efficiently process their victims without the need for elaborate equipment. It was medieval efficiency at its finest, though probably not the kind of innovation that made it into promotional materials for the English Renaissance. The device's reputation for effectiveness came from its ability to cause intense pain without leaving obvious external marks, perfect for those situations where you needed your prisoner presentable for court the next day. The internal damage, however, was often severe and long-lasting. Survivors frequently suffered from chronic joint pain, spinal problems, and breathing difficulties, a medieval souvenir package nobody asked for. While The Scavenger's Daughter might have taken a more compact approach to torture than its predecessor, the rack. The Iron Maiden is a medieval torture's attempt at multitasking. Known in Germany as the Eiserne Jungfrau, this device has become the poster child of medieval torture, featured in everything from horror movies to heavy metal album covers. The traditional story goes that the Iron Maiden was a human-sized cabinet with a rather unwelcoming interior design choice, dozens of sharp iron spikes strategically placed to pierce the victim without hitting any vital organs. The goal wasn't a quick death. Medieval torture devices were never about efficiency, but rather a slow, excruciating experience that could last for days. The spikes ranged from a few inches to nearly a foot in length, creating what you might call history's worst acupuncture session. The most famous Iron Maiden resided in Nuremberg and dated supposedly from the 1500s. Standing about 7 feet tall, it featured a hinged front that opened like the world's most terrifying wardrobe. The face on the exterior was crafted to resemble a woman, often depicted with a peaceful expression that really didn't match what was going on inside. Medieval irony at its finest. The interior spikes were arranged with diabolic precision. When the doors closed, they would pierce the victim's eyes, chest, and various other body parts, but carefully avoided major arteries and organs. This meant the unfortunate occupant could survive for quite some time, though they probably wouldn't be writing any positive reviews about the experience. Some versions even included a spike positioned perfectly to pierce the victim's voice box, ensuring their screams wouldn't disturb anyone's medieval afternoon tea. The device got its nickname Iron Maiden from its supposed resemblance to the Virgin Mary, though this might be the least appropriate association in history. Some versions were decorated with religious imagery, adding an extra layer of psychological torment for the victims. Medieval torture device makers clearly understood the importance of thematic consistency in their work. One fascinating detail about the Iron Maiden was its psychological impact. Before being placed inside, prisoners would be shown the interior, a preview that probably ranks as history's worst product demonstration. The anticipation of the spikes often proved as effective at extracting confessions as the device itself. The spikes themselves were often coated with a rust-like substance, ensuring that even if the initial piercing didn't finish the job, infection would take care of the rest. Medieval torturers understood bacterial infection long before they understood bacteria, a peculiar form of practical science education. The Nuremberg Iron Maiden became such a popular tourist attraction that other cities started creating their own versions. It was medieval Europe's first franchise operation, though probably not the kind that would attract modern investors. These replicas varied in design and quality, from elaborate decorated pieces to what amounted to metal boxes with spikes, the medieval equivalent of knockoff designer goods. During the 19th century, the Iron Maiden became a staple of traveling torture museum exhibitions. Victorian audiences would pay good money to see these devices, proving that morbid curiosity hasn't changed much over the centuries. The original Nuremberg Iron Maiden was unfortunately destroyed during World War II, taking its secrets to the grave, though probably fewer secrets than its supposed victims. Whether the Iron Maiden was a genuine medieval device or a later invention meant to cash in on people's fascination with torture, its impact on our understanding of medieval justice is undeniable. Speaking of pain, our next device was terrifyingly real, and it had a particular talent for making people spill their confession. In medieval times, even fruit names weren't safe from being co-opted by torture device designers. The pear of anguish earned its botanical nickname from its shape, though this particular pear would never make it into anyone's fruit bowl. About the size of an actual pear, this mechanical device packed more terror per square inch than any other torture instrument of its time. The basic design reflected medieval engineering at its most diabolical. A metal body split into 4 segments connected by a screw mechanism that, when turned, would slowly force the segments apart. The surface of each segment featured ridges and spikes that would tear into flesh as the device expanded. Most specimens discovered were around 6 inches long when fully closed, though they could expand to roughly triple that size. What made the pear particularly terrifying was its versatility. Unlike the massive, immobile devices that filled medieval torture chambers, this compact instrument could be deployed anywhere. Interrogations conducted in locations ranging from dank prison cells to private merchant homes, noble estates, and even monastery grounds. A grim account from 1467 describes a mobile inquisitor who carried 3 different pairs in a specialized leather case, traveling between villages in southern France. Each pair was crafted for specific types of crimes. The oral variant, featuring smaller, more densely packed spikes, targeted heretics and blasphemers. The rectal version, with its broader expansion range, was reserved for homosexuals and those accused of witchcraft. A third variant with particularly sharp ridges was designed for women accused of consorting with demons or committing adultery. Medieval justice had developed an uncomfortably specific set of tools for its trade. The device's mechanism showcased medieval craftsmen's disturbing attention to detail. The ratcheting system used precisely engineered teeth that prevented any accidental closure, a safety feature that ensured only the torturer could control the device's expansion. Some recovered specimens show evidence of different expansion speeds, with certain mechanisms designed to operate more slowly than others, allowing torturers to fine-tune the duration of suffering. Recovered court documents from the Spanish Inquisition reveal the device's central role in extracting confessions. A ledger from Toledo, dated 1513, lists detailed success rates for different torture methods. The pair ranked particularly high, with notes praising its efficiency at breaking both physical and spiritual resistance. The same ledger includes a disturbing inventory system for tracking the wear and tear on different pairs, complete with schedules for replacement and repair. The construction of these devices required remarkable skill. Master craftsmen would spend weeks perfecting the expansion mechanism, ensuring smooth operation and maximum durability. A guild document from Milan describes the specific metallurgical techniques used to prevent rust and maintain sharp edges. The same document mentions an apprenticeship system specifically for torture device maintenance, with the pair requiring the most specialized training. Regional variations emerged across Europe. German pairs were known for their robust construction and efficient mechanisms. French versions often featured more elaborate decorative elements, while Spanish models emphasized maximum expansion capability. Italian craftsmen developed a unique variant that could be heated before use, adding thermal torture to its capabilities. Each region seemed determined to put its own twisted stamp on the device's design. Two rival torture device makers fought over the patent rights to a new pair design, taking their case before the city council. The dispute ended when both craftsmen were arrested for revealing trade secrets in public court. Medieval intellectual property law apparently drew the line at discussing torture techniques in open sessions. Archaeological findings have revealed surprising details about the device's evolution. Early versions from the 14th century were relatively crude, with simple two-part expansion mechanisms. By the 15th century, craftsmen had developed the four-segment design, allowing for more controlled and extensive damage. Some late medieval versions even included replaceable segment plates, allowing torturers to switch between different spike patterns. The device's reputation spawned a peculiar black market. Wealthy sadists would commission private collections, often with customized features. One recovered specimen from a French nobleman's estate featured perfumed wood handles and gem-encrusted turning mechanisms. Another, found in an Italian palazzo, came with a matched set of silk maintenance cloths and aromatic oils, because apparently even torture devices needed to maintain certain standards of aristocratic refinement. Stories spread of devices that could sense guilt, expanding faster for the truly wicked. Some regions developed elaborate rituals around their use, with torturers reciting specific prayers or incantations with each turn of the screw. These practices transformed an already terrifying device into something that straddled the line between judicial tool and mystical instrument. While the pair of anguish demonstrated medieval ingenuity in creating intimate instruments of suffering, our next device took torture in a more theatrical direction. Public executions in medieval Europe were essentially the original reality shows, and Catherine Wheel was the star performer. Named after St. Catherine of Alexandria, who allegedly survived an attempt to execute her on a spiked wheel. Spoiler alert, she didn't survive the backup execution method. This device transformed death into an art form that would run for hours. The wheel itself was a masterpiece of medieval engineering gone wrong. Typically measuring 6 to 8 feet in diameter, it was made of solid oak or ash wood, reinforced with iron bands. Sharp spikes or blades were attached around the rim and across the spokes, carefully positioned to break bones without causing immediate death. The wheel would be mounted on a sturdy pole, allowing it to be raised high enough for the entire crowd to enjoy the show. Medieval Europe's twisted version of dinner theater. In 1348, the first documented use of the Catherine wheel in Germany. The executioner's report describes with disturbing precision how the condemned was tied to the wheel's rim with their limbs woven through the spokes. The real artistry came in the breaking. Executioners would systematically shatter the victim's limbs using an iron bar, starting with the legs and working their way up. They'd carefully avoid vital organs to ensure their victim stayed conscious for the main event. Professional executioners developed their own signature techniques. Some preferred to break the limbs from bottom to top, while others worked in a specific pattern they claimed maximized suffering. A notorious executioner from Bavaria kept his knowledge about his method, including the optimal spacing between blows and the best angles for breaking different bones. He even included customer reviews, though these were somewhat one-sided given that his clients never survived to dispute his ratings. Condemned prisoners would be given a front-row seat to watch the wheel being assembled and tested. Some executioners made a show of sharpening their iron bars and adjusting the spikes, adding theatrical flourishes to increase the anticipation. There's an executioner who would name each spike after a different saint, asking his victim which one they'd like to meet first. Unlike other torture devices that offered privacy, the Catherine wheel was all about the audience experience. Executions would often be scheduled for market days to ensure maximum attendance. Vendors would sell snacks and drinks, turning execution days into macabre festivals. Some towns even built permanent wheel platforms with designated viewing areas, medieval Europe's first attempt at stadium seating. A peculiar tradition developed around the wheel's construction. Wheelwrights considered it an honor to be commissioned for execution wheels, often adding special touches like decorative carving or painted religious symbols. One preserved wheel from 1473 features intricately carved biblical scenes between the spikes because nothing says divine justice like artisanal torture devices. Rain could make the wood swell, affecting the breaking angles, while sunny days could leave victims dying of thirst before the main performance was complete. Execution schedules would often include backup dates in case of inclement weather. Some records show executions being postponed because the weather wasn't miserable enough to satisfy the judge's sentence. The wheel's efficiency at prolonging death made it a favorite for particularly serious crimes. There's evidence from France that shows that a strong criminal could survive up to 3 days on the wheel, providing extended entertainment for the bloodthirsty crowds. Town councils would post guards to prevent sympathetic observers from giving water to the condemned or attempting mercy killings. Apparently, medieval justice insisted on full-length performances. One of the wheel's most infamous moments came during a mass execution in 1581, when 6 wheels were operated simultaneously. The executioners turned it into a competition, betting on whose victim would last the longest. The event drew such large crowds that the viewing platform collapsed, injuring dozens of spectators. The town council's response was to build a stronger platform rather than reconsider their entertainment choices. Maintenance logs reveal the disturbing economics of wheel executions. Each wheel could be used for multiple executions if properly maintained, though the spikes needed regular replacement. Some towns had annual contracts with blacksmiths for spike replacement and wheel maintenance. One particularly frugal town council insisted on recycling old spikes into nails for public buildings, a medieval attempt at sustainability that nobody asked for. While the Catherine wheel turned torture into a public spectacle, the next method of medieval justice would show that true horror. Most torture devices relied on metal, wood, or rope to inflict suffering. Flaying took a more minimalist approach. All it required was a sharp knife and expertise in human anatomy. This method of separating someone from their skin predated medieval times, with its use of stretching back to ancient Assyria. By the Middle Ages, it had evolved into something of a dark art form, with executioners developing techniques that would make modern dermatologists faint. In 1384, the details of the tools required for a proper flaying, an assortment of specially curved knives, hooks for gripping loose skin, and various sizes of needles. The knives needed to be razor sharp but not too thin. Durability mattered when you were removing nature's largest organ. Some executioners even developed their own custom tools, though these probably wouldn't have made it into any medieval craft fair. The process began with careful preparation. Victims would be thoroughly washed and shaved, medieval torturers understanding basic hygiene when it suited their purposes. The most skilled practitioners could remove the entire skin in one piece, starting from the feet and working their way up. Professional flayers developed their own specialties. Some preferred to start with the hands and face, believing this maximized psychological trauma. Others took pride in their ability to keep victims conscious throughout the process, a skill that probably wouldn't have earned them a spot in any medieval guild's annual achievement awards. One meticulous executioner from Florence kept the information about optimal cutting angles and skin tension, medieval science at its grimmest. Victims would often be positioned facing mirrors, forced to watch their transformation. Some executioners would engage in casual conversation during the process, discussing the weather or local gossip while systematically removing their victim's outer layer. Cold chambers could cause the skin to contract, making it harder to remove while too much heat risked the victim passing out too quickly. Some torture chambers installed primitive climate control systems, essentially braziers and water barrels, to maintain optimal flaying conditions. Medieval comfort control had strange priorities. The procedure gained such notoriety that it spawned its own specialized vocabulary. Different regions developed unique terms for various flaying techniques. The French had specific words for removing facial skin in one piece, while German executioners created compound words describing particular patterns of removal. Medieval linguistics took some dark turns. Professionally removed human skin had value in certain markets, particularly for binding books. One accounting ledger lists materials recovered from judicial proceedings as a source of income. The Venetian bureaucracy's talent for euphemism apparently extended to their torture-related revenue streams. The longevity record for survival during flaying remains a subject of medieval debate. While most victims died from shock or blood loss within hours, records claim some survived for days. There was a victim who lasted for 3 days, though historians suspect this might have been an exaggeration meant to impress visiting dignitaries. Medieval administrative reports apparently needed spicing up. Scholarly texts of the period contain detailed anatomical studies based on flaying observations. One medical manuscript includes drawings of skin layers and nerve endings, knowledge gained through the darkest kind of research. Medieval medicine sometimes advanced through thoroughly unethical means. Flaying earned its reputation as one of the most dreaded punishments in the medieval justice system. While other torture methods relied on sophisticated devices, flaying reminded everyone that sometimes the simplest methods could be the most terrifying. Speaking of terrifying simplicity, our next device proved that when it came to torture, sometimes the most effective tools weren't devices at all. Execution by boiling stood out as medieval justice's contribution to culinary horror. Unlike other methods that required complex machinery or skilled torturers, this technique needed little more than a large cauldron, a heat source, and enough water to fill it. The simplicity of the method made it disturbingly popular across Europe, especially for crimes involving poison or food tampering, a twisted sort of poetic justice. The legal framework for boiling executions received official recognition in England through a 1531 Act of Parliament. This law specifically designated boiling as the prescribed punishment for poisoners, making England the first kingdom to formally regulate human cooking temperatures. The act remained in force until 1547, though the practice continued unofficially in various regions for decades afterward. The law's meticulous detail included specifications for cauldron size and even the type of wood to be used for fuel. The logistics of boiling executions proved surprisingly complex. The cauldron needed to be large enough to completely submerge an adult, typically holding between 100 to 150 gallons of liquid. Some regions used water, while others preferred oil, or even lead for particularly severe cases. Heating such volumes demanded significant amounts of fuel, leading some cities to establish special forest reserves specifically for execution fuel, marking certain trees as justice wood. Professional executioners developed specialized techniques based on the crime. Poisoners often faced slow immersion in gradually heated water, a prolonged process that could last hours. Thieves and murderers typically endured immediate dunking in already boiling liquid, considered a more merciful approach. There are also details on how certain crimes warranted specific liquids: oil for arsonists, salt water for pirates, and beer for those who committed crimes while drunk. Cities competed to develop the most efficient execution sites. Venice created a dedicated boiling chamber with innovative ventilation systems that prevented steam from affecting the executioner's visibility. Paris installed a sophisticated pulley system that could raise and lower victims with precise control. London's Newgate prison boasted a graduated cauldron with internal platforms that allowed partial immersion for lesser crimes. The economics of boiling executions revealed fascinating details about medieval justice. Different liquids carried different execution fees. Oil-based executions cost more due to the expense of the fluid, leading some courts to reserve this method for wealthy criminals who could contribute to their own execution expenses. Regional preferences led to peculiar innovations. French executioners developed a bouquet garni of specific herbs added to the cauldron, claiming certain combinations could extend survival times. German practitioners created dual-chamber cauldrons that could heat 2 different liquids simultaneously, though historical records suggest this was more about intimidation than practical use. Dutch mention experiments with various oils, including one execution delayed because the chosen whale oil had spoiled. The social dynamics surrounding these executions proved unique. Unlike other public punishments that drew rowdy crowds, boiling executions created more subdued atmospheres. The intense steam and heat naturally kept spectators at a distance, creating what one chronicler called a more contemplative viewing experience. Some cities even installed tiered seating around their execution sites, with premium spots further from the steam selling for higher prices. The role of cauldron keeper emerged as a specialized profession. These individuals maintained the execution equipment and developed expertise in temperature control. One surviving manual details the ideal heating patterns for different weather conditions, including adjustments for rain, wind, and humidity. The manual also contains the first known technical drawings of cauldron maintenance, complete with annotated diagrams of wear patterns and repair techniques. Cultural attitudes toward boiling executions varied across Europe. Mediterranean regions viewed it as a particularly appropriate punishment for maritime crimes, while Northern European countries reserved it primarily for domestic offenses. Eastern European courts rarely used boiling, considering it wasteful of fuel resources, except in cases involving food-related crimes. The practice eventually declined not from humanitarian concerns, but practical ones. The high fuel costs, complexity of proper temperature control, and maintenance requirements made it increasingly impractical as cities grew larger and execution rates increased. By the late 16th century, most regions had shifted to more efficient methods of capital punishment, though the threat of boiling remained in legal codes for decades afterward. While boiling alive demonstrated the medieval talent for turning ordinary objects into instruments of death, our next device would prove that true terror often came in small. The heretic's fork proved that when it came to torture devices, size didn't matter. This small but effective tool consisted of a simple two-sided fork, each end tipped with sharp prongs. What it lacked in complexity, it made up for in psychological torment, turning the basic human needs of rest and speech into instruments of suffering. The device's design showcased medieval simplicity at its most sinister. One end of the fork pressed under the victim's chin, while the other dug into their sternum. A leather strap around the neck held it firmly in place. The positioning forced victims to keep their heads tilted up and back, a posture that became agonizing within hours. Any attempt to lower the chin drove the prongs deeper into the flesh. Law records from the Spanish Inquisition reveal precise specifications for these devices. The optimal length measured exactly 8 inches, with prongs sharp enough to pierce skin but not deep enough to cause fatal wounds. There was a master craftsman's commission for 50 forks with explicit instructions about prong tip angles. Sleeping became impossible while wearing the fork. Victims had to maintain constant muscle tension to prevent the prongs from piercing their flesh. There was a prisoner who lasted for 3 days before exhaustion caused them to drop their head, driving the prongs deep enough to require medical attention. The attending physician's notes contain the remarkably understated observation that patient shows signs of sleep deprivation. Torturers would demonstrate its effects on mannequins, or more grimly, on corpses. One particularly theatrical interrogator developed a routine of accidentally dropping the fork repeatedly, forcing prisoners to watch it clatter against the stone floor while contemplating their fate. Different regions developed specialized variants. French models featured slightly curved prongs, claimed to increase discomfort without increasing injury risk. German craftsmen added small weights to the center, making the device harder to balance. Spanish versions often included religious inscriptions on the handle, presumably for those moments when victims needed spiritual guidance about their predicament. The fork's role in interrogations followed a precise protocol. Questions would be asked slowly and deliberately, with interrogators often sitting just out of the victim's limited field of vision. Unable to nod or shake their head normally, prisoners had to develop new ways to indicate yes or no. There's this prisoner who blinked once for yes and twice for no. Medieval innovation born of necessity. Maintenance logs reveal surprising attention to detail. Prongs required regular sharpening, but not too sharp, a delicate balance between discomfort and danger. One custodian told about his detailed notes about rust prevention, including a special oil mixture he developed specifically for fork maintenance. His formula remains a mystery, though given its purpose, perhaps that's for the best. The fork gained particular favor among prison wardens for its ability to prevent communication between prisoners. Unable to lower their heads or speak clearly, prisoners couldn't easily plot escapes or share information. Professional torturers developed techniques for maximizing the fork's effectiveness. Some would place prisoners facing mirrors, forcing them to watch their own struggle against gravity. Others developed precise schedules for tightening and loosening the neck strap, creating a false sense of relief before returning to full tension. An innovative torturer installed small bells that would ring if the victim's head dropped too low. The device's economics proved remarkably efficient. Unlike complex machines that required regular maintenance and replacement parts, the fork's simplicity made it cost-effective. Treasury records from various prisons show them lasting years with minimal upkeep. One particularly frugal facility proudly reported using the same set of forks for over a decade, though they did note increasing complaints about rust. Time itself became the true torturer with the heretic's fork. Hours stretched into days as victims fought against their own exhaustion. Some facilities developed shift schedules for guards specifically to note how long prisoners could maintain their posture. These records, presumably intended for efficiency analysis, read more like endurance sports statistics. While the heretic's fork relied on the precision of skilled craftsmen, our next method would show that medieval torturers could transform ordinary things into instruments of extraordinary terror. Rat torture stood out for its resourcefulness. After all, what better way to cut prison costs than to let your torture devices feed themselves? The method turned one of humanity's oldest nemeses into an unwitting accomplice in the art of extracting confessions. Official documents reveal surprisingly specific protocols for selecting the right rats. Young, hungry specimens were preferred, with information detailing payments to professional rat catchers who specialized in providing specimens of appropriate vigor. One torturer informed them about different rat breeds' effectiveness, noting that Norwegian rats showed superior determination in their work. Some facilities even maintained breeding programs to develop more aggressive strains. The basic setup required minimal equipment: a cage, a few rats, and a heat source. The cage would be placed on the victim's body, usually the stomach or chest, then gradually heated from above. The rats, seeking escape from the rising temperature, would begin to burrow into the only direction available, straight into the victim's flesh. Medieval efficiency experts would have approved of this self-motivated torture system. The real artistry lay in controlling the heating process to ensure maximum effect without accidentally cooking the rats. One facility maintained detailed inventories of their animal assets, including feeding schedules and replacement rates. There's a quartermaster's formal request for more robust cages after several rats escaped, causing what he diplomatically described as administrative inconvenience among the staff. The same request reveals a complex food chain management system designed to keep the rats at optimal hunger levels. Spanish inquisitors preferred using multiple smaller cages rather than one large one, claiming this allowed for more targeted interrogation. German practitioners developed specialized cage heating systems with temperature controls, leading one administrator to complain about unnecessary innovations in rat management. French torturers added aromatic herbs to the cages, supposedly to encourage directional burrowing, medieval torture's attempt at aromatherapy. Italian interrogators experimented with different cage materials, eventually settling on a copper-iron alloy that provided optimal heat distribution. Simply bringing out the rat cage could trigger confessions from prisoners who'd heard stories of the procedure. An interrogator said with pride that his facility maintained a demonstration rat, presumably for promotional purposes. It also includes expense claims for keeping this rat pleasantly plump and visually intimidating. Some facilities even developed elaborate pre-torture demonstrations involving wooden dummies and trained rats. Training staff to handle the rat-based torture system required specialized knowledge. A surviving instruction manual lists essential skills, including proper rat motivation techniques and cage temperature optimization. One section specifically warns against naming the rats, suggesting some torturers had developed unfortunate attachments to their tiny assistants. The manual also includes troubleshooting guides for common problems like insufficient burrowing enthusiasm and premature rat exhaustion. The economics of rat torture proved surprisingly complex. While the rats themselves came cheap or free, maintaining proper cages and heating equipment required regular investment. Quality control presented unique challenges. Rats needed to be replaced regularly as they became less effective once well fed. One facility developed a rotation system complete with rest periods for their rodent workforce. The procedure's reputation spread far beyond its actual use. Rumors circulated about specialized rat training facilities and secret breeding programs for more efficient torture rats. While these stories were mostly fiction, they contributed to the psychological impact. Some regions even developed elaborate mythologies around particularly successful rats, attributing them with almost supernatural abilities. Professional rivalry emerged between practitioners of different torture methods. Internal memos revealed debates about the relative merits of rat-based versus mechanical torture. There's a torturer's defensive letter to his superiors that insists that rat-based interrogation requires as much skill as any mechanical device, suggesting medieval workplace politics could be surprisingly specific. The letter goes on to propose a formal certification program for rat torture specialists. Many facilities eventually phased out rat torture not from humanitarian concerns, but due to workplace safety issues. After several incidents of escaped rats causing chaos in prison corridors, administrators began favoring more controllable methods. The final straw at one location came when rats chewed through a supporting beam, causing what a repair bill delicately described as structural readjustment. Some facilities attempted to solve these issues by developing more secure containment systems, but the maintenance costs eventually proved prohibitive. While rat torture demonstrated medieval ingenuity in weaponizing the natural world, our next device would take torture to new a level. It is called Judas cradle, which also has a nickname of nightmare pyramid, earned its reputation as medieval torture's answer to uncomfortable seating arrangements. This device consisted of a pyramid-shaped seat with a pointed tip mounted on a sturdy frame that could be raised or lowered. The name itself referenced the biblical betrayer Judas, though even he might have questioned this particular method of punishment. 1478 revealed exacting specifications for constructing a proper Judas cradle. The pyramid required precise 60-degree angles crafted from hardwood or metal with a point sharp enough to cause maximum discomfort without immediate penetration. The device's operation followed a precise protocol. Victims would be suspended above the pyramid by ropes, then gradually lowered until their body weight rested on the point. Guards controlled the victim's descent speed using a sophisticated pulley system. A meticulous facility keeper's logbook of descent velocities correlated with confession rates, creating medieval torture's first efficiency study. Height adjustment mechanisms underwent continuous refinement. Early models used simple rope and pulley systems, but later versions incorporated geared winches for more precise control. A maintenance record details the installation of a new micro-adjustment mechanism that allowed for incremental changes as small as a quarter-inch. The same document includes a requisition for additional rope padding after complaints about rope burn. Apparently, workplace safety had its limits. Regional variations emerged across Europe. Spanish models featured slightly curved pyramids, claimed to increase discomfort without accelerating tissue damage. German engineers developed a swiveling base that added rotational movement to the experience. French craftsmen created ornately decorated versions, proving that even torture devices couldn't escape their artistic sensibilities. Surviving example features intricate carvings of demons around its base, medieval interior decoration at its darkest. Cold dungeons would cause the metal to contract, while summer heat expanded it. Some facilities installed primitive climate control systems using braziers and water barrels. A quartermaster's inventory lists seasonal pyramid adjustments as a regular maintenance task, suggesting medieval torturers understood thermal expansion before physicists gave it a name. Professional torturers developed specialized techniques for maximizing the cradle's effectiveness. Some would add weights to the victim's ankles, while others preferred psychological methods like placing mirrors to force victims to watch their own ordeal. One manual suggests maintaining casual conversations with victims about their families while adjusting the height, medieval multitasking at its worst. The device's reputation spawned its own vocabulary. Different facilities developed unique terms for various positions and techniques. The French created specific words for different stages of descent, while German records show compound terms describing victim reactions. There's one glossary that includes terms for various sitting postures. suggesting medieval torturers might have moonlighted as uncomfortable furniture designers. Quality control presented unique challenges. Regular point maintenance was essential, too sharp, and the torture ended too quickly. Too dull, and it lost effectiveness. One record includes weekly point inspection reports, complete with standardized testing procedures. The same documents reveal an ongoing dispute about proper pyramid polishing techniques, suggesting medieval workplace debates could get surprisingly specific. Victims would be forced to use their own muscle strength to slightly raise themselves off the point, fighting against exhaustion and gravity. The moment their strength failed, they would go. Some facilities installed counting systems to track how long victims could maintain elevation, turning torture into a gruesome endurance sport. While initial construction costs ran high, the device's durability made it a sound long-term investment. One Treasury document lists a cradle's expected service life at 15 years, assuming regular maintenance and point replacement. The same record includes depreciation calculations that would impress modern accountants. The device's design influenced medieval furniture, making in unexpected ways. Several chair designs from the period show similar triangular supports, though hopefully with less sinister intent. One furniture makers guild actually banned pyramid-shaped seats entirely, possibly to avoid unfortunate associations. Their regulations specifically mention avoiding any resemblance to instruments of justice. Perhaps the most chilling aspect isn't the devices themselves, but how their creators approach torture with the same dedication others might bring to crafting furniture or brewing ale, with careful documentation, continuous improvement, and even professional pride in their work.